My brother slid a folded note across the table and tapped it once with his finger without making a sound. I thought he was just messing with me, until I opened it and read the words that made my stomach drop. Don't drink from your glass. Just smile. When I looked up, everyone at the table was watching me. My family, my closest friends, even the people who were supposed to love me the most. They were all smiling, but not one of those smiles felt real. And 15 minutes later, someone at that same table collapsed, clutching their throat. Before I reveal what happened next, make sure you subscribe and comment where you are watching from, because this story could save your life. My name is Avery Dalton, and on the night this happened, I was celebrating my 28th birthday at a private dining room in my favorite family-owned restaurant. The long wooden table was decorated with soft candles, fresh roses, and name cards placed neatly in front of each plate. It was the kind of beautiful, warm setup that made you feel loved just by sitting there. But beneath the surface, I could feel something was off, like the air itself was holding its breath. My parents, Charles and Linda, sat near the center, whispering to each other. My best friend Jenna was seated across from me, smiling too much, her eyes never fully meeting mine. And then there was my older brother Ryan, sitting directly beside me, calm, focused, almost too still. If anyone else had been acting this way, I might have brushed it off as nerves or awkwardness. But Ryan was never nervous. He was the kind of person who ran toward burning buildings to pull people out. Literally, he was a former military medic and the most observant person I knew. Earlier that week, my mother had insisted on planning a sit-down dinner instead of a party. Just close family and your closest friends, she'd said. I hadn't argued. After the year I'd had, with a rapid promotion at work, stress, and losing an extended family member, I was grateful for something quiet, safe, familiar. As plates were being set down and drinks were poured, I noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Conversations seemed forced. People were watching me more than usual, like they weren't just here to celebrate, but to witness something. My glass of sparkling juice was placed directly in front of me by the restaurant manager himself, who smiled and said, "This one is special, made just for you." I thanked him politely, but something about the way he said it unsettled me. Ryan hadn't taken his eyes off that glass since it arrived. The food was served. Laughter started to build. My mother reached for my hand and told me how proud she was of the woman I was becoming. My father raised his glass to give a toast. I was smiling, trying to feel normal, when I felt something brush my wrist. It was Ryan's hand, sliding a small folded note onto my napkin. He didn't look at me. He just kept smiling at the table as if nothing was happening. I opened the note under the table, expecting it to be some joke or birthday riddle. It was not. Don't drink from your glass. Just smile. Don't react. My heart lurched. For a moment, I thought I had misread it. I glanced at my brother. He had the same calm expression, but there was something in his eyes I had only seen a few times. Once when we were trapped in a house fire as kids. Once when our mother collapsed from a medical emergency. It was the look he had when danger was already here. I lifted my glass just to keep up appearances, but I didn't drink. My eyes moved slowly around the table. Everyone, every single person was watching me, smiling, waiting. That was the exact moment I felt it. The celebration wasn't for me. It was about me. The warmth and laughter around the table felt like a mask stretched over something cold and calculated. I held my glass in my hand without bringing it to my lips, doing exactly as my brother instructed, smiling, keeping my heartbeat hidden beneath an expression of calm. I could feel the weight of every gaze on me, especially Jenna's. She was usually the loudest one at any social event, always telling stories, making everyone laugh. But tonight, she was quiet. Her eyes kept flicking to my glass, and every time I pretended to lift it, the corners of her mouth twitched upward, not in happiness, but in anticipation. My stomach tightened. Across from her, my father seemed unusually distant, his eyes fixed not on me, but on the reflections in the glass of the wine cabinet behind me, as if watching someone else's movements. My mother kept dabbing at her napkin, the way she did whenever she was nervous. I realized then that this wasn't just a feeling. Something was deeply wrong. And the only person acting normal was the one person who knew the truth, my brother. The server brought out the appetizers and set a plate in front of me. The scent of lemon garlic shrimp, my favorite, wafted through the air. But instead of excitement, I felt a knot in my chest. My eyes drifted toward the glass again. It wasn't just placed randomly. It had been positioned perfectly in front of me, angled, garnished, clean, almost staged. I glanced down at the note hidden in my lap, reading Ryan's words again, silently. Don't drink. Just smile. My pulse thudded in my ears, and I forced myself to continue acting natural. This looks amazing, I said, pushing the plate forward. My voice sounded normal. Too normal. My mother relaxed slightly, thinking everything was fine, and picked up her fork. A few others followed suit. But Jenna was still watching me. That's when Ryan leaned over and quietly whispered, "Switch seats with me." His tone was gentle, but firm, like an order disguised as a suggestion. I hesitated. If I stood up, everyone would notice. If I refused, I might be putting myself in danger. Slowly, without making a sound, Ryan stood and pretended to stretch, bumping his chair slightly so that the attention shifted to the movement rather than the purpose. I followed, moving casually into his seat while he took mine. No one reacted, except Jenna. Her eyes widened for a split second before she forced her expression back into a neutral smile. It was only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Ryan sat in front of my glass now, resting his hands on the table. He wasn't going to drink it, but whoever wanted me to drink it now had to adjust their plan. That alone told me the truth. What was in that glass was intentional. A few minutes passed. Conversation slowly recovered, but it had changed. It no longer felt like a birthday celebration. It felt like a game of observation. My uncle, seated near the end of the table, kept glancing toward Ryan's hand as it rested near the glass. My cousin whispered something to her husband, who subtly shook his head. I saw Jenna reach under the table and touch the leg of the person next to her, as if signaling them. I didn't know who was involved or how many people were aware of what was supposed to happen, but I knew one thing for certain. I was not imagining this. Ryan passed me a second note under the table. My heart pounded as I read it. There is something in the drink. They're waiting for you to sip it. Do not let them see you panic. Someone at this table wants you gone. A chill crawled up my spine. I looked at each face one by one. Who would want to hurt me? Why here, in front of everyone? Why on my birthday? My mind scrambled for logic. I had just received a significant inheritance from my late aunt, money that hadn't yet been publicly disclosed. The only people who knew were my immediate family, and Jenna. I told her in confidence just 2 weeks ago. I thought she would be happy for me. But now, sitting across from me, she was biting her lip and watching the drink like her life depended on it. Suddenly, she reached for her own glass with shaky hands, lifted it to her lips, but hesitated. Her eyes weren't on her drink. They were still on mine, or rather, on Ryan's. At that moment, I knew someone at this table was counting minutes, counting breaths, waiting for the moment I trusted them enough to lower my guard. A quiet tension spread like electricity, the kind that builds right before lightning strikes. Then, as if on cue, a relative at the far end of the table stood and proposed a toast to Avery's beautiful future. Everyone lifted their glasses. Everyone turned to me, waiting, watching, smiling. I forced a smile back, my decision already made. The next move I made would determine whether I lived through the next hour. And as I raised my empty hand in a fake toast, I caught something in the reflection of the wine cabinet behind them, a second drink being slowly slid toward me by a hand that shouldn't have been reaching for anything. Someone was accelerating the plan, and the trap was closing in. The second glass being slid toward me was not a mistake. It was a signal that whoever planned this wasn't going to wait any longer. The hand that pushed it across the table belonged to Jenna. Her expression was soft, her smile rehearsed, but her eyes were anything but friendly. They were steady, expectant, almost daring me to pick it up. I realized then that she was not acting alone. On either side of her, my cousin and her husband shifted slightly, watching for my reaction. The toast ended and glasses clinked around me. Ryan, Without breaking eye contact with the others, gently placed his hand over the new glass, blocking it from reaching me fully. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone disrupted whatever plan had been in motion. Suddenly, Jenna's smile cracked. She pulled her hand back slowly, but I saw it. A flash of frustration, followed by panic. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and for a moment, the world around me blurred. I wasn't imagining this. Someone sitting at my birthday table had intended to eliminate me. The question was no longer if, it was why and who exactly was behind it. I looked up at my mother, searching her face for answers. She wouldn't harm me. That much I was sure of. But her expression wasn't one of confusion. It was one of fear. Not fear directed at me, but fear for me. She knew something. My father, usually composed and steady, was gripping his glass so tightly his knuckles had turned white. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a spontaneous plot. This was a family moment gone horribly wrong because someone had been waiting for this day. Someone who had access. Someone who blended in perfectly. Before I could process it further, the restaurant manager entered the room and quietly whispered something to my father. My father's eyes widened. He stood abruptly and said, "Avery, come help me with something." His voice was firm, not requesting, commanding. The kind of voice he used when something serious was happening. I stood, and Ryan stood with me. Jenna's head snapped toward us, and I saw her eyes widen with alarm. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, my father stepped in front of me protectively, placing a hand on my back as if guiding me. But I could feel it. He wasn't guiding me. He was shielding me. We walked toward the hallway, away from the table, but I couldn't ignore the growing whispers behind me. Someone stood up from the table. Chairs scraped. I heard the clinking of utensils hastily set down. Whatever was hidden beneath the surface was about to come into the open. My father led us into a private corridor near the kitchen, and the moment the door closed behind us, Ryan turned to me urgently. "Someone at that table tried to poison your glass," he said without hesitation. "You can't go back in there until we figure out who it was." Before I could respond, my father added in a low voice, "This isn't random. A lawyer contacted me this morning. Your aunt's estate transfer was accelerated. Someone paid to gain access to the documents. Only your legal guardian as next of kin could have done that, and they requested it to happen today." The world tilted under my feet. Today wasn't just my birthday. It was the day the estate was scheduled to transfer fully into my name. Money, property, influence. But that still didn't explain the note. That still didn't answer the real question. Who wanted me silent before I even touched what was mine? Ryan reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial. He held it up. "I tested the rim of your glass before you arrived. There was residue, not lethal immediately, but enough to cause organ failure within hours." I stared at him in disbelief. My own celebration, my own table, my own family, and someone had planned to end my life without hesitation. Then I remembered the look Jenna had given me weeks ago when I told her about the inheritance. Not joyful, not supportive, calculating. Before I could process, the restaurant lights suddenly went out. A scream pierced the air from the dining room. Ryan immediately moved toward the door, ready to act, but my father held out an arm to stop him. "Wait," he said. "This is not just about you, Avery. Someone else was targeted tonight." We rushed back through the hallway. The room was in chaos. One of the guests was collapsed on the floor, gasping for air and clutching their throat. Jenna stood nearby, her face pale, her hands over her mouth. But her eyes weren't filled with shock. They were filled with realization. The wrong person had taken the glass. And our night was no longer about stopping a plan. It had just become a race to uncover the truth behind it. Chaos surged through the dining room like a shockwave. Chairs toppled, plates shattered, and guests scrambled backward as the man who had collapsed, my cousin's husband Marcus, fell to the floor clutching his throat, gasping for air. His eyes were bulging, terrified, and his face was turning a sickly shade of red. Someone screamed, "Call an ambulance!" But Ryan was already at Marcus's side, tilting his head back, checking his airway with rapid precision. Jenna stood frozen only a few feet away, her hands trembling violently. In her shock, she whispered, "That wasn't supposed to happen." But the look in her eyes told me everything. She wasn't horrified because something terrible had occurred. She was horrified because something unplanned had occurred. The poisoned drink had not reached its intended target, me. Instead, Marcus had taken my seat after standing up briefly to show someone a video on his phone. When he sat back down, he unknowingly drank from the glass that was meant for me. Ryan barked orders, snapping me back to reality. "Avery, move the table, now!" I grabbed the edge of the table and shoved it aside as my father helped him clear space on the floor. Ryan pulled an emergency injector from his jacket, something he always carried due to his field experience. He jammed it into Marcus's thigh. For a moment, time stood still. Everyone watched, breathless, and in that suspended moment, pieces of truth began falling into place in my mind, like a horrifying puzzle locking into completion. The way Jenna had insisted on sitting across from me, the way she personally handed me that drink, the subtle tension in her expression every time I hesitated to pick it up. And now, her reaction, not grief, not concern, just raw panic that the plan had gone wrong. Marcus coughed violently, then rolled onto his side, breathing raggedly. He was alive, but barely. My mother was crying, my father stood rigid as stone, and other guests had formed a terrified circle. And then Ryan stood to his full height and faced the group. His voice was steady, controlled, more frightening than if he had shouted. "Nobody leaves this room," he declared. Every eye turned to him. Some gasped in protest, but the authority in his tone silenced them instantly. My father moved to the doorway and blocked the exit. Ryan continued, "Marcus just ingested a toxic substance meant for someone else, and the person who prepared it is in this room." Gasps broke out. People looked wildly from face to face, and someone yelled, "That's ridiculous!" But Ryan held up a small digital strip. It was from a rapid chemical test kit. On the strip were two distinct colors. "This confirms it. Toxins derived from a paralyzing agent. Whoever planned this thought the victim wouldn't collapse immediately. They would leave this dinner feeling fine and never wake up." My eyes shifted slowly to Jenna. She was shaking uncontrollably now, her eyes darting between me, Ryan, and the glass. I didn't want this," she stammered, stepping backward. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." My stomach dropped. "Wasn't supposed to happen to him?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked at me then, tears spilling down her face, not from sadness, but from the sudden realization that everything she had set in motion was unraveling in front of her. "You don't understand," she whispered, but Ryan stepped forward. "Oh, I think we do. You knew about Avery's inheritance. You knew she was going to receive full access today." Jenna shook her head, sobbing harder now. "You don't know what they made me do," she cried out. "You don't know what I was threatened with." The room fell silent. Ryan lowered his voice. "Threatened by who, Jenna?" Her eyes flickered toward the head of the table, where our Uncle Richard sat, utterly still. His face was calm, too calm. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. And that was when the final piece fell into place. Uncle Richard, the executor of my late aunt's estate, the only person with legal control over financial transitions, the person who stood to lose everything if the inheritance was passed to me instead of being reabsorbed into the family trust he managed. My breath caught. "It was you," I whispered, staring directly at him. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "It didn't have to be this way, Avery. I tried to handle things quietly. You were never meant to be part of this." Rage flared in my chest. "It was my inheritance. My aunt left it to me, not to you, not to the family trust." His eyes hardened. "That money doesn't belong with you. It belongs to the family legacy. You would have squandered it." Ryan stepped closer to him. "You involved outsiders. You hired people. You poisoned your own family member to get to Avery." Uncle Richard shrugged slightly. "Collateral damage." The room erupted in shock and disgust. Jenna fell to her knees crying, realizing Richard had no intention of protecting her. In that moment, everything changed. Ryan pulled out his phone, having already contacted authorities with a pre-recorded alert. The door burst open as law enforcement officers entered the room, taking control. As Richard was handcuffed, he turned to me and said quietly, almost with pity, "You think you're safe now? This is not about money anymore. When you expose secrets, you inherit enemies." And as I watched him being led away, I realized something chilling. My birthday wasn't just the day someone tried to end my life. It was the day I discovered why my life had value to people I never even knew were watching. As the officers led my Uncle Richard and a silently trembling Jenna out of the dining room, a heavy stillness fell over everything. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, but empty, like the air itself was trying to process what had just unfolded. The candles still flickered on the table. Birthday decorations still hung from the walls, and my untouched plate of food sat in front of me as if pretending nothing had happened. But nothing was the same. One moment, I had been celebrating my life. In the next, I was realizing how close I had come to losing it. Guests began to leave, their faces pale and shaken, whispering apologies and disbelief. Some avoided eye contact, ashamed they hadn't noticed what was happening right in front of them. Others hugged me tightly, their hands trembling, unable to form the words they wanted to say. But their voices didn't matter in that moment. My eyes kept searching the room until they landed on the two people who never looked away from me the entire night, my brother and my father. Ryan stood beside me, his calm presence the only anchor I had left. My father sat down across from me, his face etched with a pain I had only seen once before, when we buried my aunt. "A family is supposed to celebrate life," he said quietly, "not try to end it." There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment, not at me, but at the people he once trusted. My mother gently wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, whispering, "You are safe now. You are safe." But I knew that safety was no longer something I could experience passively. It was something I had to choose, protect, and actively guard. Because safety is not just the absence of danger, it's the presence of awareness. And that awareness had been forced open inside me tonight. Later, after everyone had left except for immediate family and law enforcement, I sat alone in the quiet dining room with my brother. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion. I stared at the glass that had been meant for me, a simple, clear glass, harmless to the eye, deadly beneath the surface. And that's when it struck me. Evil rarely appears as a monster. More often, it looks familiar. It smiles. It toasts to your future. It holds your hand when you cry. Sometimes it even shares your bloodline. The realization didn't shatter me. It clarified me, because knowing the truth about the world doesn't make you weaker. It makes you prepared. Ryan placed a hand on my shoulder. "You were never alone tonight," he said. "You were in danger, but you were never without protection." I looked at him then, tears finally breaking free, not just from fear, but from gratitude. If he had chosen to ignore the signs, if he had hesitated, if he had stayed silent, I might not be alive, but he didn't. He watched, he acted, and his courage saved me. As law enforcement finished gathering evidence, they informed us that this was not an isolated plan. There were financial documents, digital traces, and communications that proved my uncle had been siphoning money from the estate for years. Exposing him meant freeing not just myself, but every family member unknowingly affected by his manipulation. It wasn't just about inheritance, it was about control. In the days that followed, my life changed quickly. Investigations opened, lawyers called, the media got involved. I was no longer just celebrating a birthday. I had become the center of a case that would change the future of my family forever. Some relatives begged for forgiveness. Others tried to distance themselves from the scandal. Jenna was charged with attempted harm and conspiracy. My uncle faced federal charges. And while justice would take time, something in me had already settled. I wasn't afraid anymore, not because there was no danger, but because the truth had been dragged into the light where it could no longer hide. On my first night home after the incident, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at my own reflection, not to check my makeup or smooth my hair, but to look into my own eyes and remind myself that I survived not by accident, but by awareness. My life was not saved by luck. It was saved because one person saw what I couldn't see, and because in the moment of truth, I chose to believe the warning rather than the illusion. And now, I carry that awareness with me, not as fear, but as strength. My birthday didn't mark the end of something. It marked the beginning of a new life, one built on truth, guarded by intuition, and strengthened by the knowledge that sometimes the greatest danger lies at the table with you, but so does the greatest protection if you know who truly stands beside you. If this story made you realize how important awareness and intuition are, subscribe right now and comment where you are watching from, because your voice could be the one that protects someone else.